Okay, so in this exercise we're going to go through steps on how to make an actual fender from an existing surface that we've already built. And we're going to use the square tool as kind of the primary function, as well as using the project tangent and or align tools as well. What I have here is a model where each one of these panels has been created as a square surface, so defining this in terms of four-sided boundaries. Okay, building it in order so that the top surface and the side and the front are all created first, and then the radius or the connecting surfaces are all built secondary. Okay, so these are built afterwards and then trimmed out part of that. But the main focus here is this one quarter panel that we created with a square surface, and I want to taper off of that a new surface that's going to have a represent the fender for this particular wheel. Okay, so I have a wheel here just as a proxy, a simple revolve form. I'm going to use this as kind of the guiding part of where I'm trying to integrate this new surface out to, basically hitting on that wheel rim section coming out off of here. So first thing I'll do is in the side view, I'm going to design how I want the outside wheel part to begin coming off of that other surface. So we can do this either by making this primary quarter panel live. So if you hit the Make Live selection tool there, and then I'll go in with a new curve where I can basically create with an edit point curve. That's kind of my preference when I'm trying to get more accurate snapping modes to the surface. So with the edit point tool, I'm going to snap this so that our first point represents somewhere down here before we leave that other surface where we want to begin translating, and then put another edit point somewhere towards the top. It can almost hit the edge of that other surface there, and then come back down on the bottom side again. So we're snapping it back down onto the edge of that other surface. Okay, now once I have this part created where I have my actual curve on surface there, you're going to want to start editing this curve on surface. So I can do this by going in and just grabbing CVs and manually moving or modifying where I want those points to be. Maybe in this case these are just snapped down kind of along the rim section here. And we can move this other one over to that side. Now, because a curve on surface may give you a little bit more trouble as far as trying to translate off here, you may want to try the other approach, which is actually projecting a curve on surface. So I'll show you that one as well, and we'll use the edit curve tool as well for that one. Okay, so you can start off this way. This can be my trim curve, or I can opt to just draw this from a side profile without using the live behavior. So I'll de-live that surface and then go in again, but this time I want to make sure I definitely go outside of the surface so that when we trim it, it's not going to be a problem. So I'll snap it down to the bottom here, come up again back towards the top of that surface, and then come back down, exiting the surface at the bottom. So again, we have our arch, but this is not a curve on surface this time. Okay, to edit this, again, we can go in and grab CVs, be able to manually position where we want these, or you can use under Edit Curves the curve editing tool, which will give you this slider kind of parameter control to run along the surface and create our actual edit here. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this tool, basically the way it's set up is this diamond, the yellow diamond that I have selected now, will allow you to translate across different parts of the curve. And if I move it all the way down to the end, then you may want to take advantage of the little jack lines that are showing here in green and red to create kind of a snapping direction. If you're all the way down to the end, it will only modify that next CV from the end of the curve. Meaning that if I want to snap the line this to the y-axis, it will make sure that only that next CV is aligned there. So we're basically creating a vertical constraint to the y-axis here. Okay, if I grab this slider and went to the other end, I could again constrain this to the y-axis. Okay, the way this controller works, if you hit the bottom one, it will constrain it to the kind of opposite end. So you may want to flip the orientation to make sure that that thing doesn't create tangency by reversing back up in positive Y here. Okay, so you can slide it along that way. You can also bring it up to the top here, and right in the middle of those jacks is just your regular translate tool. Okay, so you can be able to translate around the surface. Notice that when I'm doing this, though, it is affecting the other points that I already made tangents. So you may want to get this one locked in first. You can also play around with the scale of this by grabbing the diamond at the end of that translator and be able to drag this as kind of a scaling tool. All depending on the number of points you have as far as how many control points you're going to want on that curve. If you don't want this part to be moving too much, you may want to have more points in the middle of that arch. Okay, you can also use this square manipulator that's off the curve editing tool and be able to prop that back and forth to give it a rotate. Or again, coming back in and line this up at the end, so I can say line that to the x-axis, so that one's tagged in there. Okay, you can also scale from this point. So if you use the scale slider, you can pull this up a little bit higher, again on just how you want to design that overall wheel arch. Okay, and then the traditional method of just translating a few points in there. So I want to make sure this fully is inside of that overall quarter panel. Okay, that's going to give us our best behavior here. And then just kind of design it. If you want to add some more tension, you may want to add some more points in here just to create a tighter arch. This is just representing then the part we're going to come off the surface. So notice that that part is sitting in the middle of the curve, or the middle of our center line here. So we don't really need to adapt this one over to the edge because we can just project it from our orthographic view. So what I'll do at this point is go in here and select my my quarter panel piece, select my curve here, and then go in and project the curve on surface. Okay, using the reset options of what's called active view. So we're actually just projecting it all the way through that orthographic active view now. And then we'll hit the apply. Okay, this will create our curve on surface this time. So we'll have really two curves, one that was off the surface and then the actual curve on surface that was projected on to the model there. Okay, at this point we're going to trim this one. This is going to be our main hole going into the body, so we want to make sure that we don't see a surface coming through the middle of the tire. So I'm going to go in here under Edit Surface, use the Trim tool, and select my surface that I want to trim, and then I want to keep basically outside of that wheel opening or that larger circle here. So be sure to tag a point out here and enter that, and we basically have then created our larger trim curve boundary. Okay, now we have some other curves that are left over here that were responsible for the activity of building the square. So we really don't need to use these at this point, so you can hide them if they get in the way or put them on another layer. I'm going to hide that one particular one for right now. And then the next thing I want to do is actually create my wheel opening. Okay, and this will be the actual wheel arch that goes around the tire. So in this case I'm going to do this from, again, a side view. We're going to start out drawing with my edit point curves. Basically give me 3 separate points with the edit point curve to create that more pointed section here. And then we'll go in with our CVs or our curve editing tool and start to manually kind of position how we want that arch to fit over the surface. Okay, so this is just going to be encompassing the boundary of where that actual wheel arch is going to exist here. Okay, notice that it's going to be offset or inset from the other surface that we had trimmed out. Okay, coming into our perspective mode, you can see that that was drawn at the center line. So I'm going to take this curve and translate it out so that it's fitting pretty much right over the tire. Okay, and this is basically a design preference as far as how far out you're going to want that. In this case, I'll offset it enough that it does expose a little bit of the tire and will sit a little bit more flush with our other surface. Okay, this is pretty much a perpendicular line to that ground plane. So you may want to also arc this in a little bit too. Okay, so if we go back to our CV curve, I may want to take a few of these points towards the bottom here and just translate those in or give it a little bit of curvature pulling back towards the middle there. Okay, not too much that we're extending beyond the top view of our surface. So you can see that this back one here was really pulled out a little bit too far. Okay, so I'm going to need to bring, or pushed in a little too far, I'm going to need to bring that out just a little bit. So again, it's creating that dynamic where these are going to sit flush with our other surface. Okay, and again, it's all pretty much design preference on how you want that thing to look, and rotate your views as much as possible to get a really good feel for how that surface is going to look before we actually start attaching all this. Okay, so that's our first part, creating now our curve that extends where our wheel arch is going to be. We already have our trim back surface here. Next thing is to feed some new curves in here so that we can adapt a square surface in between there. So the way we're going to do this is go into our curve snapping and draw another edit point curve using the EP curve tool. And I'm going to want to snap this so that I curve snap just down along our trim edge so that it will stop right at the base there. Okay, and that'll be our first point. Our next point will drag down to the extending curve coming off of that surface. And you'll get basically bridging the connection between that inside curve and the outside curve. Okay, the next thing we'll do, let's get rid of this back curve here, is take and create the other curve. So I'll go back to my edit point curve tool, curve snap from here onto that other opening. Okay, so we've created one complete closure at that point. Now, this is enough that we can build a square surface. We do have 4 boundary curves, but you may want to have a little more control at the top of the arch by adding a third curve that will extend between them. Okay, and this is done again with the edit point curve. And curve snap it up towards the top, and then curve snap it onto that extending curve there. Okay, so this will start to create that angled away surface and designing basically how that wheel arch is going to be formed here. Alright, now that we've created the bridging between those, the next thing is to make sure that we have a smoothly integrated surface. If we're going to be using square, we want to build a good ramp for that surface. So on this curve, we want to make sure that it is really smoothly aligned with that other surface here. Okay, so this will create a nice smooth tangency. And to do this, we'll use the project tangent tool. Okay, project tangent you find under edit curves, project tangent right there at the bottom. It will have options in here for how you want the tangency created. You have the options of tangent or curvature. Right now we'll use tangency. Which direction do you want to line it to? The U or the V of your original surface, or coming normal or basically perpendicular to the surface. Most of this stuff you can change afterwards, so it's not a big deal, other than you may want to keep originals off, and then go and proceed from there and change this later in the attributes. Okay, so the way I'm going to set up my project tangent is you'll select your surface, shift select, or select your curve, shift select the surface, and then say project. Okay, so again, if we don't really check our options or our surface direction, we may not get the proper tangency that we asked for in our options. You can see right now the way this is creating tangency is it's aligning more to the vertical isoparms of that surface. So that's creating this little hook coming tangent off this way, or basically in our vertical direction at this alignment. So I can go in the attribute editor or into the channel box here, give us a little more room, and you can see that it says in the channel box tangent direction. That's set up to U. So I'm going to change the tangent direction to, in this case, run in the V direction of the surface. Okay, so now that is aligned or running along the V direction. If we look really, really close, though, we can see that there's actually a little hook on the end. Okay, this surface is doubling back here. Okay, that slight little hook just means that the tangency is trying to create it going in this direction to the left instead of smoothly integrating to the right here. So you can fix that a couple ways. There's the option of reversing tangent, which you could turn on. okay, which will flip it the other way. Or if reverse tangent was off, you could go in and take your tangent scale value and make that a -1 instead of a +1. Okay, that will basically do the same thing. If you're doing this and you hit the T or show manipulator, you can also run the tangency through some manipulator control. So hitting T show manipulator will give you things like a control to scale that tangency. And again, we can see the positive or negative feedback or kind of reversing that over the surface. So we want to go in this direction and then scale it out to how far you really want that tangent to take place. If you would look at, say, the CVs of that surface, when you're moving the tangent scale, you're really just moving that second point away from the end of the curve. So it's just pulling it along that line of tangency. Okay, so we can line up one of those there. The other point on that curve is kind of a free point where we can opt to select this and manually move it. Okay, so you could grab that point and just drag it around. So maybe you want to fit this flush or have a negative kind of curvature to how that fender is going to bend in there. Okay, so you can move those that way. Or else you may want to use your curve editing tool again. So we can go into curve edit. And one of the downsides you'll see is I was getting an error that it won't work because we have history on. So you'd actually have to void your history at this point, meaning the history between the tangency that we had there. So you can do that if you want to use the curve editing tool. Kind of a bummer that they don't work together. So if I do that, delete history, I will be able to get back to the control of using the curve editing tool. But they can't coexist with project tangent. So you just have to find a little workaround for that. And what I'll do in this case is align this up to the x-axis. And you can see that that flipped the wrong way. So I will select the handle going in the opposite direction with the curve editor. And now we have that smoothly aligned to our x-axis. Or we could opt to say rotate this and have it kind of bend down a little bit. Okay, so either way will work. Now same idea on the other end to get this smoothly integrated. We will again select our curve and then shift select our surface, and then we'll go in and do the project tangent. And we noticed that again is in the U direction, so I will flip that over to the V direction, and we can see that that's reversed. So we can reverse tangency or hit our T show manipulator, scale our tangency to go in the opposite direction. Okay, so we're creating that smooth control for that second point away from the curve there. Okay, and then our other point we can grab with CVs, and if we want to just manually adjust it, maybe this flattens out towards the bottom here. Okay, so we have that one set up. Now for our center arch, or this mid-curve, it's basically going to be the same steps again. So we'll grab those two, go in and do our project tangent. If we need to reverse the tangency again, or play around with the scale. Okay, so this one's a little more critical, and we're really designing how that rim section is going to really integrate across here, or how that fender is going to fly down. So if you want to have a real smooth integration, you want to give a little more tangency, but also a little more lead gap between these two. Or if you want to make it a little tighter so it's really a quick turn as it goes from one place to the other. Okay, and then you still have control over that other point. So if we look at that point, say from a side view, we're really then designing how that overall fender is going to look. Is it going to come down here as a curve and then flatten out vertically here? So we get a little bit of a S transition, okay, like this. Or do we want to just kind of fade off and just do a continuous slope there, where in that case we're just going to fold that over a little more. Okay. And this we're really just looking at a single wheel opening. You could break this up into several sections and do separate squares. This one's a little bit faster in that you're only dealing with really one sweeping surface that's going around here, meaning that we could extend another surface coming off there. Or you could even break this up into two separate curvatures. one for the kind of negative curvature, one for the positive. So each one of these could actually be a break here too. Just gives you more control but more complexity. Okay, now to actually build this this surface, here's what we have so far. So we have our model of the quarter panel and wheel, and then I want to go in and integrate this piece here. And I'm going to do this basically by going into Square. Okay, so if we go into Surfaces and turn on the Square tool, I'm using this primarily as Square. I use it as a tool, not an action, meaning that I go into Edit and say use this as tool here. Okay, this just allows me a little more control, that I can go in and pick on all 4 curves and then it builds the square right away. Notice that if you use it as a tool, you get tool behaviors down at the bottom. One of them is we turn on to use 4 boundary curves, so that it will build 4 curves and then finish. If you turn that off, it would finish after doing 3 curves. Okay, so since we're setting this up as a 4 curve boundary, we want to make sure that that option is set up correctly. So go into the Square tool. First thing I'll do is just drag select or marquee select right over that trim curve. Okay, notice that it will select the entire trim curve because we trim this all from one curve here. And then I'm going to select one of my project tangent curves that's feeding into that boundary surface. Okay, that'll be number 2. The third one I'll select is that really the wheel arch or the wheel opening. And then the fourth one we can pick is that center line section. Okay, now this will create then our tangent surface. Basically the setup or the way Square is going to get read in then, if we look at the green indicator lines that are here, this surface was automatically, surface number 1 here is automatically labeled tangent because it is sitting or butting up against another surface here. So we have these 2 connected. The other ones are all labeled fixed because there is no adjacent surface being built here. So the bottom edge, the rim profile, and then that section over there are all fixed. Okay, if we want to come back later and manipulate this, we can, but I'm going to go in and add in my other surface now. So with my Square tool again, I will pick my, say, wheel, the larger wheel cutout that we trimmed, the inside section, then our wheel arch, and then this time we really don't want to use our profile of the original curve. We want to use the edge, which is this isoparm edge of the other curve. So that is going to be used to specify our center line tangent to the other surface, because we already now have another existing surface here. Okay, so if we look at this shaded, then I can throw on my couple of my shaders that I had before on the rest of that surface, so you get a little bit more uniform look to that. Okay, and that will then create your wheel arch. So you'll have a smooth translation between those 2 surfaces. Now, if you want to, occasionally when you're building off a trim edge, meaning that this surface here or this surface are both built off the trim edge of a surface that already existed. So it tends to put in a few more isoparms into the surface when it's being created. If you want to reduce that, you can play around with using the option of rebuilding one of these sections here. Meaning if I grab one of these edges here, square surface that I just created, and I go back and hit T or show manipulator, I can find that that one surface is labeled tangent again, and that is edge number 1. Maybe I want to clean up this edge a little bit, reduce some of the isoparms by rebuilding it. Usually one rule for rebuilding is to do it on a trim edge. Okay, so rebuild this curve number 1. So I'll come over to the channel box, rebuild curve is off for all of them, and I'll turn that one on. And you'll see that we'll reduce some of the data that's happening in between here. Okay, you always want to check that in your real surface, meaning that where those 2 edges meet up, you want to check really close and make sure that it did not leave any kind of gap in the geometry, and that your tolerance is up large enough too to prevent any kind of gap in there. Okay, this other surface we could also rebuild. So if I'm at a level 1 and I go back to my square surface, I can see that is also edge number 1, and if I turn on rebuild, again you'll notice some data reduction. But this may have reduced it too much, which again is one of those things you want to watch out for. Is there going to be a noticeable gap in the wireframe between those two surfaces? So you have to kind of use your judgment on that and see whether that is a optimal thing to do when you're selecting and rebuilding those surfaces. Okay, so that will create our wheel opening, and then we have our smoothly integrated surface. Now, if you want to create more of a gradual connection between here, you would want to use a much larger curve or change some of the profile for that. In the middle of this, you do have a little bit of construction history that you can tailor around with, and that would be, say, if we take the center arch curve, which we created earlier, has some points on here. Again, we did our project tangent, but I can grab some of these CVs and still manipulate them because the construction history will allow you to, say, drag this up or down, and you can see that the square tool is basically going to try to update that surface. So going in and pulling this surface up or down, by just moving that curve, it allows you to kind of change the behavior of how you want that wheel arch to look. Okay, so you can drag it up or down here. You could also scale your project tangent curve, okay, meaning that that original curve that I used to project tangency along that surface. So this one is still sitting here, and you still have your project tangent slider, so if you change your tangent scale value, okay, you can drag this up or down. And again, we're just feeding into the profile curve that was used for the square, and that is then modifying both of the resulting curves. So I'm scaling the tangent scale of that curve that I originally did my project tangent with. Again, you can see that that allows you to move the other end of that wheel opening so that you can flatten it out or create a really tight tangent or a really big loop there. And then you have the other curve again that you can manually go in and drag around to select how you want that arch to work. Okay, so that's basically just doing a wheel arch. This technique you can use for a lot of other areas. Maybe you have a little raised hood section up here at the top, or you want to start feeding a bumper off here by projecting curves. It's just kind of a general tool for using square, but methodically building up the next surface that you're trying to extend out to. Okay, and that'll do it.